Hello and welcome to LPA Live. My name is Phil. We are LP Alliance. We're an intercaucus coalition trying to revolutionize and rebuild the Libertarian Party. Today we're joined with Jacob Winograd, and Rob Yates is my co-host. We're going to be talking a little bit about the LP culture war and the fact that the party has been so divided that it has kind of entered a duopoly state where we have multi-factions that are almost warring. And people become so stuck to that tribe that they have to then, basically make excuses for bad actions of members on their side of this debate. And we think that has caused a very negative and constant progression of this negative state in the party. And hopefully today will represent a place where we can discuss some things, even if we disagree, maybe find some common ground. And so this is Jacob. He's actually a member at the Libertarian Christian Institute, and I'm giving him a little bit of time here to introduce himself, what he's working on, and then a little bit about his opinion about the state of the party.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for having me. As you mentioned, I am a member of the Libertarian Christian Institute. I run our social media, and I also have a podcast called the Biblical Anarchy Podcast, and occasionally co-host our main flagship podcast, the Libertarian Christians Podcast. Other than that, I've worn different hats within the Libertarian Party. I've been a county chair. I've been chair of my state of Pennsylvania's state party social media, and currently is serving on the judicial committee. And I guess people also might know me as I was for a while, I think from 2021 to 2023 or 4. I forget when I stepped down, but I was a Mises Caucus state organizer and active in that role as well. So you can, from that tell what side of the quote unquote culture war that I'm coming from. I did step down as an organizer, and you could probably go back and find I made a public post about it when I stepped down, because I definitely still agree with a lot of the Mises Caucus vision for the party and the platform and things like that. But I did kind of get tired of the intra-party fighting dynamics, and also a difference in strategy when it comes to certain things that that the Mises Caucus was oriented towards, mainly just like the general divisiveness. And I never liked how they tended to just block people who disagreed with them, and a lot, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And but I kind of felt like I don't know. I always thought that ideally the LP should be like, I joined because I agreed with, I guess, the initial Mises Caucus premise that the Libertarian Party had kind of tried a certain way of doing things for a long time, and it didn't seem to be working. And so there was a time for a change. And I still kind of think that to some extent. But it's clear that, however I feel about that initial conviction, what's been going on for the last, 3 years, 2 years, is also not working for various reasons, which we can get into. So I'm not interested in going back to the way things were in, pre-2020. I'm not interested in keeping things the way they are. I don't know if that means a middle ground or something new, or even what, if even the Libertarian, I wouldn't say I'm black pilled on the LP. I might be getting gray pilled on politics in general, which is always the temptation when you're an anarchist such as I. But yeah, I think the state of the party, I think things have cooled off a little bit. But those underlying tensions and hard lines in the sand still exist. I'm interested in trying to bridge them and the divides if it's possible. But I've tried in the past and had various degrees of success. So, but looking forward to this conversation. I appreciate you guys reaching out and asking me to come on, and I'm sure we'll have a good conversation.
Awesome. Rob, I guess now is also time you should probably introduce yourself. You've been on here a few times now, but maybe introduce yourself and also give your opinion and of the state of the party and your kind of past in it.
Yeah, so what's up? Rob Yates. I'm the communications director for the Libertarian Party in North Carolina. Been doing it for like 3 or 4 years now. I actually, I think I am still in the Mises Caucus, technically. The North Carolina one had kind of a weird split where we had some disagreements with National because we were like, hey, you stopped being libertarians, and they didn't love that so much. I don't like the culture war, the duopoly in the party at all. I would actually highly recommend that everyone, I try to watch it at least every 2 or 3 weeks, go watch Spike Cohen's speech from Reno when he warned about the party becoming a duopoly. He said he could see it happening, and nevertheless, that's what we went ahead and did. I have a rule that I won't say anything bad about another libertarian. There's plenty bad to say about uniparty people going on that we don't need to be directing our attacks inward. Certainly, we should be open to criticism and looking for ways to get better. I can't afford to get gray pilled or black pilled on politics as much as I would love to step away. I certainly respect the anarchist perspective. But I feel like if we give up, then who's going to carry this torch, literally this torch of liberty? And the LP Alliance offered a venue for people with differing views to come in and present them in ways that are accepted and respected, act in good faith. And I'm very happy to be a part of it. And I was really excited for this conversation. Phil actually was looking for someone who's sort of more, let's say, quote unquote, right libertarian. And I don't know if I'd go that far. I kind of fall into the libertarian category in a lot of ways. But I do philosophically kind of lean to the right a little bit more, at least on the libertarian spectrum. I think most Republicans would disagree with that strongly, but that's how it goes with us. So yeah, thank you for being on here.
Okay, so we have somebody. Maybe I'll give a little bit about myself. I consider myself a second-generation libertarian. I grew up not being allowed to pledge allegiance to the flag. So if that gives you any idea of what my childhood was like, I stood there with my arms at my side while there was public pressure to kind of pledge to the state. And so that was me and my brother standing there at various schools fighting against that pressure. But that's how we were raised. And I stayed out of the party. I did not really care much for what was going on. I knew that there was tons of fighting. I had been asked by family members to come in and try to help fight in this caucus war that had happened. And maybe I should have tried building bridges back then. I think it was a time and place where I don't know if bridges could have been built then. I think things were so heated that I don't know if it would have happened. But I stayed out of it because I did not see much value in it at the time. But how the party has gone now, I look at it and go, we have to do something. Our philosophies are the only ones that are going to answer this kind of looming, march towards technocratic totalitarianism, right? And so if we don't find a way to say, hey, we agree on most things, we should find a way forward. We should look at the problems and issues that we've had, have an honest discussion about them, and say, hey, these things were bad, and we should call them out. We should talk about them, and we also shouldn't paint in broad brushes. Right. And I think that's the big part of LP Alliance so far has been an absolute rejection of collectivist actions where we paint anybody associated with anybody as being these things. But if there is a individual that we look at and say, hey, these are some bad actions or these are things we need to call out, we will call them out or we will discuss them internally. And I think that's the way we move forward. And then, I think that's why the failure happened in the past. But it is nice to hear that there is this kind of shift, even people that are of those mindset, where you're also thinking like, hey, enough is enough. So I guess the question comes now is like, what would be your opinion of what started this? What started the culture war? What in your opinion, what will be the solution? And if you had a perfect vision for the future, what might it be for the Libertarian Party? If you're not totally black-pilled on politics yet, and I'll maybe start with you, Jacob.
That's a very good question. And it's complicated, and I'm sure it's one of those things where I don't know that you can reduce it down to one thing. I mean, I know in terms of what started the Mises Caucus, and at least this particular saga, a lot of that had to do with things that I guess the former chair, Nicholas Sarwark, did, and making some comments towards people from the more Mises Institute, I guess like right wing of the, Ron Paul wing of the Liberty Movement, which really upset a lot of people. And that being in conjunction of the 2016 Weld Johnson ticket and some of the more infamous moments from there, including at least kind of soft endorsement of Hillary Clinton. I have an anecdote I can talk about that, which kind of ties in, but I think more fundamentally, what's caused it is that there's a culture war because there are just different cultures, right? Like we have a unified, for the most part, political theory, right? Like even for all the like, really which I find fascinating, but they are kind of I don't know, at this point in the game, maybe not the most useful debates between minarchists and anarchists, because it's just kind of like we're not close to either. So I mean, it's fun philosophical, banter at like 11 o'clock at night in on Discord or Twitter or Signal, but it's like it is a little pie in the sky to be having that debate when we're not close to that. But like generally speaking, like you go to any libertarian, be like, do you agree with non-aggression principle, with private property rights, yada, 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 pro peace, pro social cooperation. I mean, we have a general united political philosophy, but we do not have a united culture for various reasons, right? Some of that's just that people have a bias because of where they live or their background, or there are particular issues where things get messy. And so libertarians don't all agree. And so then they kind of will end up kind of agreeing more with one side or the other, in terms of left or right or Republican, Democrat. And so because of that, I think that's the underlying issue, that we don't have that unified culture, and any attempt for a ceasefire is often taken advantage of by one side or the other. It's kind of what I've noticed, because a lot of people come in, including recently Chase Oliver, going, "We need a ceasefire on the culture war stuff," which, like, in that sentiment, that idea is one I generally agree with. But I've noticed what happens is one side will say, let's do that, and then the other side kind of says, okay, well, you're gonna say ceasefire, now I'm going to go on the offensive and try to push things towards my cultural norms. And I say that legitimately, both sides are guilty of this, of trying to push and I'm definitely, I think it would be silly to say I'm not a right-wing libertarian. I am a step removed from, I'm not like a full-blown fundamentalist Christian, but I'm a very devout, orthodox, Bible-believing Christian. I have very conservative social views. So if we're talking about things like LGBT, if we're talking about things like marriage, if we're talking about, the right way, like what I think is the right way to live life when it comes to things like even drug use and family life, communities and things like that. Like I tend to be very conservative on those issues, even though I'm an anarchist, so I don't believe in the idea of a state, and so I'm not really saying that these things need to be enshrined in law, but I definitely have my cultural biases. But I'm happy to leave those off the table. But I'll admit it's hard for me when I see some people who are more on the, I guess if you want to call it progressive or libertine or whatever side, and they try, like a good example would be like LP Louisiana. They have a very strong tilt towards, I think, pushing the more what I would call socially progressive messaging through their LP affiliate accounts, right? And I was always careful when I ran. I know I'm rambling. I'll try to land here soon. When I ran like the LPPA social media, I was always very like, we're not going to post things about abortion. We're not going to post things about marriage. And if we do talk about marriage, we're going to take the thin libertarian stance. We're not going to do virtue signaling to right or left, because I don't want to stoke that. But just because I'm human, when I see some people stoking it in one direction, that can invoke a reactionary, response where I'm like, look, if you're not going to play, ceasefire, then I'm going to want to push back, because I don't particularly agree with that being the right way to message things, for better or worse. So
can I comment on this a little bit? I think there's an idea that this is somehow a cultural thing, when in reality, I think many libertarians, especially people that are going to be in the Libertarian Party of Louisiana, and myself included, is that there is currently state action against a group of people, right? There's ones that are trying to, if a state is going to exist, it should be as, unbiased as possible towards worldviews. And we are seeing currently an outright attack on certain worldviews. And it'd be the same thing if all of a sudden, the state was trying to make certain faith related things. In your case, I would be saying we need to be going out there and saying, hey, you can't tell him he can't put this faith in some government document or anything like that, that he wouldn't be able to exercise your way of life. And we see that happening now currently with a different way. And I think that's where, regardless of where somebody might stand personally and say, hey, I might not understand it or whatever, you might not be able to square it with your religion. But you might go, hey, I can see that the state is acting in this way. We should probably be calling out the fact that there's not a neutrality here, and it is very targeting towards groups. Because I think if anybody's going to be looking at, hey, the state is attacking a group, libertarians should stand up for it regardless of whether you agree with that action, right? And it's the same thing with, like, if you go back to Ron Paul's speeches about heroin, right? Remember when he stood up in front of the GOP and was talking about heroin?
Yeah.
And it was like, well, do you need the government to tell you not to do heroin, right?
Yeah.
Like that, like, even if a person might have that personal view, the party itself needs to be the one that says no, right? Like, you can't sit here and attack certain people, right? And especially if it's for a lifestyle that is, they're not harming anybody else, they're not doing anything to you. I think that's where there's like a distinction, and maybe I would hope that wouldn't be a culture war thing in general, right?
No, I think if there are specific, like if it's in the courts, or if it's like if there was some bills being proposed in certain states, or God forbid the federal level, that were specifically saying, targeting a group of people, I think you should be allowed to comment on that bill. But then there's like this general, just kind of like what I would call more of the kind of like virtue signaling woke, capitalist kind of like a rainbow brigade thing, kind of like when Pride Month, when all these corporations, which are honestly like, the furthest thing from being free market, capitalist organizations, right? Or even like, agencies that we should detest as libertarians, right? Like the CIA or Boeing or Raytheon, right? And they all go, rainbow pride flag everywhere, like in the meme that like the people in the Middle East are like, the bomb's falling. At least they're really tolerant and diverse now, right? as they're dropping bomb. Like I don't like leaning into that sort of branding, right? So if we're talking about the issue, I think it's fine to say, hey, this legislation or this case is being brought up between the court. The state has no business interfering in the private affairs of individuals. Ideally, the state shouldn't be involved in marriage at all. Like, I think we should talk about them, but we should, as much as possible, just stick to the actual, thin plumb line libertarian response, and not try to mix in what I think there is a point where you go beyond just speaking to the principles, and you are wrapping the message in a certain cultural wrapping that's meant to appeal to one side, and it happens at the expense of the other. That's what I would say.
So I brought up a comment here for Joe. It's fuck the pride flag, swastikas only. And so this is I think a real sentiment that people have said, hey, certain things that might be very, very offensive, those are okay. But a colored flag.
You can go look at my X profile, and you will see me calling out LP Colorado and LPNH for their anti-Semitic shit posting, which I 100% do not defend. I was actually very upset because I'm someone who has actually defended both of those affiliates on some of their more controversial messaging at times. Like I defended them on the whole Meghan McCain post, which I understand why that offends some people, but I was kind of like, you know what? I'm not going to get offended at bullying warmongers and and the whole thing of like, how could you make fun of someone who lost their parent? I'm like, there's just a hypocrisy there that's hard for me to like get over, where I'm like, okay, her father is responsible for how many children losing their parents or vice versa. So like, don't ask, like, would I make that post? No, but I wasn't going to get crocodile tears over it. But no, like, sharing posts with a bunch of anti-Semitic symbols and memes and graphics and things like that is not only like beyond just the like it being offensive and wrong. I get really angry at that because as someone who spends a lot of time criticizing Israel and what the state of Israel is doing to Gaza, there couldn't be anything worse to do for our case than to actually like lean into the accusations that to be against Israel's war in Gaza means you hate the Jews, right? So that actually on two fronts makes me very upset, because it's one thing if like randos on the internet do that, but when LP branded accounts do that, I have no tolerance for that.
So let's get Rob in here. I have some things to say, but I think another opinion would probably be better here. How do you feel about this process and the idea of maybe promoting pride flags? And I will say, Jacob, I appreciate that this like messaging that you've kind of put out there recently of saying like this is not okay, and I agree with you that it does damage the would-be allies to stopping the sort of violence that we're seeing in the Middle East.
So I think that to ignore the culture war completely is just to make a tactical or strategic mistake. The powers that be, so to speak, and when I say that, I kind of mean people that are running for office, people who are, fishing for clicks to promote their campaigns, the uniparty, the legacy media, and what they're doing. They love pushing culture war issues because it's what gets people going. Abortion is by far the most divisive issue in the country, and it's not even close. And then the whole trans issue has raised to the top, and it's incredibly divisive right now. And I mean, there's just a lot of misinformation coming from both sides, but they push the levers very well. It's that red light flashing in the background to try and get people going. That being said, when Raytheon puts up a pride flag, I think we should call out how ridiculous that is, because then you go to their Middle Eastern offices. So I know, Jacob,
exactly.
you mentioned the bombs falling with the pride flags on them, which is absolutely true. I mean, these are companies that are out there stealing our tax money to blow up children on the other side of the world. That should be enough, but it isn't. But we should also point out, if they're so in favor of, the LGBT movement, then why aren't they putting pride flags up in their Middle Eastern offices? Like, do they have
Right.
principle or not? It's all broad virtue signaling. And I do think there's room for us to comment on nonsense like that. What I dislike is seeing some of the messaging coming from affiliates, whether it be Louisiana or LPNH. And I like both, and I would love to spend a lot more time hanging out with both. But they are clearly leaning into like, this is going to get some rabble rousing going. This will get people clicking and joining in. And we're going to avoid, real bold libertarian messaging like, hey, it sucks to see a daughter mourn the loss of her father in any situation. But don't forget that this father, who should have been more sympathetic to the horrors of war than anyone from what he went through, and could have come back venerated truly as a hero by a lot of people, instead turned and dedicated his whole life to stealing more of our tax money to blow up more children overseas.
Yeah. No, 100% agree with that. And, I did a live stream recently with Jim Babka, who's the host of the Grace Arcade podcast, and I keep on referencing this conversation lately. But he had this way of putting it, which I 100% agree with, which is that like the LP should be a space, ideally in my mind, where a pastor can show up to a convention or a meeting and sit next to like a sex worker, and they have completely different lifestyles, completely different, like maybe even priorities and emphases, right? Disagree on a lot. But while they're there, they are in unity in their opposition to for me, it's the state existing, or at the very least, the state existing and doing anything but the enforcement of actual, like, natural rights, property rights, and things like that. But like, for that kind of space to happen, I think it's like then the messaging just needs to be that very thin libertarian message, because when you cater to one side or the other, then either one of those people in that scenario, I think, are going to feel like they're not being represented, or that, like, for me, it's like if you're gonna, for all the talk about like the duopoly, right? It's like, well, if you want to leave the duopoly, but then the LP is going to be like, mimicking the duopoly in some of its messaging tactics, like just like a coming along behind it with the same sort of tactic, then it almost, like, for all the talk, which I think there's some legitimate conversation we could have about the folly of supporting Trump, that a lot of the Mises Caucus libertarians did this last time around, and making it look like GOP light, like the GOP recruiting team or something like that. Like I think that's a fair conversation to have. I just think that can cut both ways. Like, like I would say, like what the Sarwarks and the old guard were doing, we're basically making it the, like, we're the the Democratic light party, right? We're the, we're with you on all the progressive social issues and whatnot, but we don't want to raise taxes. Like, and I feel like what we need to present to people ideally is just to be like, we're completely different from both sides, and we're not like, and so maybe the issue is not is even that, like, we need to like libertarianism is almost a philosophy of negation, insofar as it is sometimes easy to be like, we're focused so much on what we're against. I think that's part of the problem, is it creates this negative ethos, and we need to actually create a positive ethos of like celebrating the internal diversity, because our uniting principle is liberty, right? And making that the dominant culture, that like we have these very diverse sets of people within the party. But to do that means that then you have to try to represent all of them, and not just be like, telling one side, like, sorry, like, we're going to be doing messaging that appeals to this half of the movement and party, but not this other half.
So how much, I want to go back to the first point you made about, like, we should be a place where, like, a sex worker and a priest can sit down next to each other, and that should be, like, acceptable. And we've gotten to a place because of the culture where I think we've rendered that nearly impossible. And a lot of it's this, like Rand talked about, like, collectivist nonsense, identity politics, just ridiculousness, where you're your label first before you're a person. And that's uniparty nonsense. That's dehumanizing nonsense, so that you will hate someone for being a Democrat or a Republican and then vote against them. For us to have embraced that, and for what it's worth, and one of the reasons I got into Mises is I think that was being pushed too much prior to Mises. I think Mises was a response to that, but then, as the pendulum does, it swung back way too far, adopted the tactics, took them on more aggressively, and became everything that they were supposed to be against, and so much more and so much worse.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, I've been alarmed, and like, people can say I was, I don't know, naive and missed it. I don't think that's the case. I think that there was always an element within the Mises Caucus, like your Jeremy Kauffmans and whatnot, which were on the edgelord side. But what was the central heartbeat of what we were doing was not based in identity politics. Now it's a bit more muddy. I still think it's kind of like, I mean, I don't know what your thoughts. I feel like the Mises Caucus has kind of fractured, and like half of it is still kind of like focused on the original mission of just local politics and trying to make the LP more of an entity that focuses on, like nullification and issue coalitions and things like that. Like the things that I joined, that's what convinced me to join the Mises Caucus was those things. But it does seem, in the wake of the whole Trump strategy, that a lot of them have really embraced the identity politics side, just in the opposite direction, which, like, that's one of the Mises Caucus's platform planks, is is an opposition to identity politics, which does need to be across the board. Like, it's okay to say, I don't want to be doing the pride flag stuff. I don't want to be doing the Black Lives Matter stuff. But it also means, like, we shouldn't be saying we're fellow travelers with the Groypers and the rise of white nationalists, including Christian nationalists, which are, the Venn diagram there is very nearly a circle. Those are becoming problems. And I'm willing to admit that I was wrong, and I will admit maybe there was a bias here. I came out of the left, and I was so turned off by the left's identity politics that I think I turned a blind eye to maybe the identity politics that were lurking in the shadows on the right. And I thought, because I thought, for the most part, listen, racism's a thing of the past, anti-Semitism's a thing of the past. Like I grew up in the 90s and like we didn't care about that stuff, right? And if that, like we were learning about like the civil rights movement and stuff in public school, and just like I just accepted like, oh, this was things we struggled with in our past. It's not a present reality. And then when the left after Trump started calling everyone who was conservative and voted for Trump, you know, a bigot and a transphobe and all this, and they didn't match my experience, even though I was on the left, I had a lot of conservative friends and family, and I was just like, they're not, you know, they're not this way. Not every Trump voter is a, you know, Charlottesville tiki torch holding, you know, white supremacist or Nazi. So I just thought it was nonsense and noise, especially with how much I would get those accusations thrown my way. I just thought I like, as much as the right can do a moral panic, I kind of thought that's what all the left was doing, was just kind of their version of a moral panic. But anyway, there's more I could get into there, but I'll shut up for now.
Well, I think this is like a big question here, is that there was a blind eye turned to some of these things, and almost like, oh, it's no big deal. And it's been allowed to fester to the point where it's like a part of the branding now. And even more than that, from the collectivist side, is that there is a very clear pathway that's happening between libertarian to very fascist like ideologies. I think it comes from some anarchist theory of Hoppe and things like that, where you can now justify using force to maintain a covenant. And then that allows you to basically take the things that you don't like and say, I'm going to use force to make sure that my community remains this way. And I think that's a dangerous path to walk. And I think it's led to a group of people that think they're libertarian. And then a lot of the discussions out of them is that, well, the only way we get to actually libertarian is through fascism. And it also does the same sort of argument, like the only way we get there is by like an entirely white majority. And I think this is a horrible thing to have like just let fester. And I understand that like there was a condition at the time where like anybody, a comedian, said one thing that might be a little bit off color, and then people imagine that they had hate in their heart. I think there's very clearly people that actually do have hate in their heart that will admit that they do, and they will do everything they can to propagandize that.
Yeah,
and if we can't call that out, that's a problem, right?
I think you're partly right, but I also think, and this is where it's complicated, because some of these people might have hate in their heart, but I also think it, to some extent, the problem is better and worse than that. Better in terms of, I actually think that a lot of these people don't have like, you know, like genocidal, extreme supremacist hate in their heart, but they are possessed by bigoted ideas and like pseudoscience and just like harmful rhetoric that's kind of like, you know, it's collectivist status nonsense that's rotted their minds. I wouldn't necessarily blame Hoppe. That's a whole other conversation I don't want to get into now.
At least his philosophy could be distorted in that way that allows people to kind of wear a cloak of that, right?
Yes, yeah, at the very least, I can agree with that. And I think, I mean, I was just arguing with someone today who is someone who I've known for a while, is in the LP, I think I forget, holds some position in a state party, and is telling me that, like, you know, the black race is just dumber, right? There's the whole race IQ stuff, and that, you know, that like, and he's a Christian too, and he's like, they can be saved and they can, you know, come to Christ, but they're just always going to be dumb, and you know, it's okay for us to limit immigration and do all this stuff because like it's just harder to implement, you know, a libertarian society if you have, you know, a bunch of low IQ people in it who are more predisposed to violence, which is just it's so again, some of that might be hate. But I don't know if it's like, you know, hate's a strong word. I think, you know, prejudice, bigotry, and then like wrong, like if you can, like, here's the humans are complicated, right? You can have a prejudice and a bigoted idea. It doesn't necessarily mean it's coming from a place of like pure hatred, but it can be just like a, I don't know. At least I wouldn't equate the two, right? They're maybe they're cousins, but sometimes it's just like you generally. Like you genuinely believe false information you've been fed, which is.
Can I give an analogy there though? Because you did bring up like they believe these things and they are okay with these restrictions around them because of that. that same sort of argument can be done for lifestyles that you might not agree with religiously, right? Like your religion might pull you off there. And
Oh
that
yeah.
you might be blinded by the fact that like I have this religion, and so then you will then be okay with treating people a little bit worse off, or maybe not supporting them when the state comes after them as much because of that, right? And I think that's something that people should be aware of if they do have those biases, and say, hey, I'm going to acknowledge this, that this is in me, and then be willing to. And I would imagine as a Christian, the goal is that, you're not there to judge, right? Maybe I should have said in the beginning, we weren't allowed to pledge allegiance to the flag because we pledged allegiance to nothing but God. That was what I grew up in. I'm no longer a religious person, but this is something I always believed, is that you should be, you should have no judgment of others, right?
I mean, I homeschool my kids, but I don't even let them do like Boy Scouts or Cub Scouts because most of them make you do Pledge of Allegiance and like flag ceremonies and rituals and all that, and I refuse to let my kids participate in that nonsense. No, listen, I agree, and like I think this is tough because again, prejudice is a hard thing, and I think it takes some level of self-awareness to recognize it in yourself. Like, I can recognize that because of my religious beliefs, I don't think it's like a prejudice towards the people, but I have a prejudice towards the lifestyle of a trans person or a practicing gay couple or gay person. Like, it's not it's just like, I don't agree with your lifestyle. In my religious beliefs, think that is sinful. And it's not just them. Like, I think that about people who are doing hard drugs, or who are just, even if they're straight and just not married and just being promiscuous and sleeping around. I have a prejudice towards that, right? But I do commit to like respecting their rights, that like if they're not hurting anyone, I don't want to use violence to stop them. But B, to also like not reduce a person down to just their lifestyle or just like that one issue that I disagree with them on. And I don't know why, but that is something that I think a lot of people struggle to do. But yeah, no, there has been a big jump, like a big I don't know, falling off where for a while it felt like I was on the same page with a lot of people when it came to like, all right, listen, like I'm more like, you brought up the immigration stuff. Like, I'm an anarchist. I don't think states should exist. I don't think state borders should exist. But if a state exists, then it was like, all right, if we're going to have some kind of immigration system, does it have to be fully open? Because there are some people who are concerned about that, right? Even like, I saw Chase just made a comment. Chase's position, as he can probably chuckle and remember, he was constantly blasted by Jacob Hornberger because he doesn't have a purist open borders position. I mean, it leans more towards open than closed. And I would generally be like, yeah, listen, I don't know, like open borders in the fullest sense seems like a pipe dream anyway. It might be more pragmatic to pursue something that's, more streamlined, maybe more decentralized, but that's not fully open. And then it seems like at some point there was a big like like a Mott and Bailey or a Peyton switch, and now everyone's just like, actually mass deportations are good, libertarian. And it's like, no, I never signed up for that. Never agreed to anything like that. That's not. So anyway, as far as that goes.
No, I agree that there's probably this, especially, I think the Mises Caucus had a lot of support from anarchists because it was like, hey, we're getting anarchist messaging. We're not doing all this other stuff. And then it's like, oh, well, that person that we had there, we can never have somebody like Weld. And then it's like, actually, we're all supporting Trump. And it's like, I don't know how the cognitive dissonance didn't like break a lot of people. I think it did.
Well, here's the thing, like on the Trump thing, let me just say, and I voted for Trump. I voted for him not because I wanted to support him. I voted for him because the way that I understood the whole thing being sold was that it was a strategic gamble. That it was like, we know that there's no upside to a Kamala victory. There are all these potential upsides and promises to a Trump victory, including the promise of freeing Ross and potentially, more optimistic paths to peace between Russia and Ukraine, or at least, ending that conflict, or the U.S. involvement in it. And so, but I was kind of like, fine, like, we'll vote for him because maybe in this case, the lesser evil is there's enough potential upside there to kind of justify seeing what we can get out of that. And worst case scenario, it's just like, both candidates are pretty much the same anyway, so we're not going to see, like, the downside seems similar. I never signed up for, actually, we're just going to basically become very supportive of Trump, not allowed to criticize his really bad policies and takes, and try to bend over backwards to be, to find every way to like do mental gymnastics, whether it's on tariffs, whether it's on his failed negotiations so far to bring an end to any of these conflicts that we're involved in,
Trust the plan.
the mass deportations, the I don't think any of them have passed yet to my knowledge, but the attempts to ram through anti free speech laws and stuff, and this rise in identity politics on the right, to where people are just, I mean, it all coalesces together, where, and so like there's a little smidgen of truth here, right? That I do think the rise of identity politics on the left, it was always like people were warning that could have a reactionary effect on the right. I do think to some extent that is the psychology of what's happening, but that doesn't justify it. And that especially doesn't justify it for libertarians who should just freaking know better. Like, I can be more sympathetic towards your average conservative Republican voter who just got so tired of identity politics that then they felt like, because they're not rooted in some kind of core principle. They haven't really like woken up to the reality of the evils of the state and the system they live under. They don't understand the problem with the two-party system and how it plays them, right? So I almost like, I can understand how people fall into that. But if you're a libertarian, you should be able to see through that's not a path towards increasing liberty, right? You're just, so it's frustrating.
Hey, I want to come back to something you said a little bit before. You said that prejudice is nuanced and complicated. And I actually think it's really, really simple. I think there is a very strong evolutionary psychological bent towards being suspicious of people that aren't in your perceived in-group. I think that came from a million years of it being safer to kill the person from, the tribe or the cave system over than to get to know that person. But what that also did was make us very strong socially within our in-groups. And so that's where you see some of these bonds growing and the willingness to dehumanize. So you said people don't have hate in their heart, maybe a few. Of course, there's some that do. I don't think most have hate. I think they have fear that's manufactured. Yeah. Immigrants are going to take your jobs and eat your pets. But then you mentioned voting for Trump. So this drives me crazy, I'll be honest. If you were like, I voted for Trump because I thought he was going to free Ross and that was the best chance we had, okay, I can accept that. Like, it's one thing. He said it several times. Fine, it's one win. But to believe that the biggest narcissist on planet Earth, who has more money and power and these sycophant followers and demands absolute loyalty or he turns against you, he's trashing Thomas Massey, one of the only two good people in Congress again today. He's a horrible person in every single way. He's been disgusting his entire life. His entire gimmick has been find people who don't have power, get them to do stuff for me, and then sue them into oblivion. There's story after story about it. To be like, yeah, but maybe he'll be good this time. Like, it's either naive or blind. And like, I don't want to come down on you because you certainly clearly are not operating in bad faith, but to think that it was a strategic gamble, like really, there was no gamble about it. It was pretty clear we were going to lose that one.
Well, so this is going to be like me talking out of both sides of my mouth, because I guess I'll be defending why I did it, but also kind of admitting that it has not worked out the way I thought it would. But I think at the time it wasn't more. It was maybe a little bit more than just about Ross. That was certainly a big part of it. I thought that that was like of all the promises that he made, I was like, well, that one's like the easiest to do, and I think there's the most evidence to be optimistic that he can follow suit on it. Beyond that, I certainly was not going into it with a naive like, oh, I'm very confident he's going to follow through on all this. It was kind of more of a I'm curious because there's enough, at least what seemed to be different people around him this time, that as much as everything you said about him is true, I was like, because I think the weakness of Trump is that he doesn't have a core philosophy. He is a narcissist. But I was like, but if like the people around him are at least marginally better than the usual swamp creatures we get, then I thought there's a chance that maybe there's a few other little wins we'll eke out, right? Like just the fact that Doge was like reposting Ron Paul multiple times, the fact that like the there was at least a departure from the very pro-war, pro-total war sort of approach in the people like RFK and Tulsi, and like Vivek, who then dropped out later, but was still kind of part of that coalition at the time. It felt like, okay, there's like enough there that it's kind of different. And the other thing I said, and like, I think what I said word for word is that there's two possible outcomes. The one possible outcome is that Trump follows through on more of his stuff, and it's still going to be an imperfect administration. There'll be a lot of things to criticize, but maybe this will be like one of the rare instances where there was an evil that was lesser enough that it was like worth letting that play out to kind of like slow down the driving towards the cliff at 1,000 miles per hour. The worst case scenario, I said, is that Trump is just as bad as he was before, in which case, and like maybe fair enough for people who've been in the movement and the party for a long time, what I'm about to say is going to trigger you, and I can respect that. Just keep in mind that a lot of us who
is
are
everyone
newer,
sitting down?
What?
I said, is everyone sitting down?
Yeah. But like, just to be fair, like, I'm about to turn 33, but I guess I'm on the younger side for some of the people who have joined, and I've only been a libertarian since 2018, so I guess 7 years now, and I actually never voted Republican in a presidential election before voting for Trump, and I was just like, listen, the meme is that Republicans talk about small government, but when they get in, they don't. Like, now this time they've pitched the best sales pitch they've ever pitched in my lifetime since I've been paying attention to politics. That they're really going to cut the deep state. They're really going to end a bunch of wars and roll back. That like it's other than the tariffs and the immigration stuff, which the tariffs is worse than Harris because she wasn't going to do it, although she was threatening price controls. The immigration, they've always both sucked. It's just Trump is more honest about how bad he's going to be on immigration, whereas the Democrats lie and pretend they're not going to be. Although even this past cycle, they basically dropped the facade and said, no, I'm tougher on immigration than you are. So that's a whole other, wild shitstorm. But I basically said the worst case scenario is then, like, we'll know without the shadow of a doubt that there will never be a cycle where Republicans will ever actually follow through with meaningfully shrinking or rolling back government, which is kind of how it's playing out, and it sucks for sure. But I think what sucks worse is that, like, I thought if that happened, then everyone who kind of went along with me was going to go, all right, well, that didn't work, and Trump is, as bad as people said he was, and we're not going to be, like, we're going to go back to what we need to be focused on, which is, the local elections and, recruitment, and like not thinking there's any good to be coming from, the two-party system. But that's not what happened. A lot of people have just, doubled down on twisting themselves into as many knots as possible. It's like, I have friends there, right? And like, I don't want to demonize them, and that's going to upset some people, but like, I'm not going to demonize them. I think they mean well. I think that they think that they are actually pursuing liberty, that the best way to pursue liberty is to try to leverage our voting block and our influence to try to nudge the people at the top to do the right things, and that this will somehow like trickle down economics, but for like political, like if we just influence the top enough, then that'll like trickle down and have an effect on the local stuff too. And I'm just like, I think they they forgot to jump out of the boiling water, right? And they I think they've kind of lost the plot. And now they've become, unfortunately, again, I don't want to like a lot of these people are people that I love dearly. But to me, I hear them talking and they sound like the MAGA people who were like, trust the plan. He's playing 3D chess. And I'm just like,
well, today I saw a video of Trump going after Massey, and Massey, he doesn't represent my version of libertarian, right? But I recognize that he is principled in his version of libertarianism, and I can respect that, right? And Trump is attacking him very hard right now, saying that he doesn't understand economics. And I think that moment today did wake up a lot of people. I saw a lot of posts today on X where they're saying, hey, this is fucked, right? And I worry that this will be like a continual cycle if the people that are still saying, hey, let's trust the plan, if those people aren't surrounded by people, like you said, that you care about them, you think that they're, just kind of lost, if those people are not being engaged with, to wake up, recognize that the enemy is not my version of libertarian, right? That this process, we are going to be stuck forever, right? And then, the idea of blackpilling politics entirely is the only chance. And in that point, we will just be a kind of an endangered species, right? Who do you think, if we end up in a totalitarian government, who goes up against the wall first, right? It doesn't matter if it's a Massey libertarian versus me, right? We represent a different political philosophy entirely, even if we're slightly different, right? And I fear that if these things are not directly engaged and called out, that this is going to be a problem. And it's the same thing with legitimizing the party. If certain things don't get done to legitimize the party, fix some of our branding issues, that this is the future, right? This is what happens in every time you move towards a totalitarian government. We've seen it over and over and over again.
Well, yeah, no, I agree with a lot of that, because to me, the idea was that, like, so let me at least give you the sales pitch from like what the Mises Caucus perspective was, at least for someone like me, which was that, like, our plan was to run Dave, and that was just going to be a huge messaging campaign to then funnel a bunch of people into the party, in the same way that Ron Paul didn't win but woke a lot of people up. And then we were going to be like, okay, cool. Like, we ran this campaign to let you know we exist, let you know what we stand for. But the real, like, solution is not at the top. The real solution is, running at the local level for mayor, city council, school board, sheriff, constable, and nullifying the heck out of the federal government and state government whenever they, step out of the line. And putting more power back in the hands of people to, have, that's what the decentralized revolution concept is, right? Dave didn't run. I'll be the first to admit Rechtenwald was a disaster. I tried to give him a chance, had on my show a couple times, but I didn't endorse him, which in hindsight, I'm really glad I didn't, because he's sadly fallen for, I think, the JQ conspiracy stuff, and that's really sad. So then I think they were kind of, they had, this like Trump came to convention and they were like, well, we didn't get our guy, or we can't do our strategy. Let's try this out. Maybe we can get some concessions and use our leverage. And it's like, fine. Like, I was okay to try that, but then, like, exactly what you said, I think, or part of what you said, which is that then if, like, the minute he starts going, super totalitarian on a couple things, like the whole idea of like this, like using the Libertarian Party as a sort of like kingmaker or spoiler and voting block, means you have to actually stand up to them, right? And that's where I just, like, I feel like their arguments, like, what? So listen, you could completely disagree with the kingmaker strategy from the get-go, but hopefully you can at least appreciate what I'm saying, which is that for that strategy to even work, you have to actually threaten to play spoiler. You have to say, oh, you're going against Thomas Massey. Oh, you're going for mass deportations. Oh, you're saying, fine, Israel can turn Gaza into a parking lot. No, like, this coalition is done. And now, politically speaking, we're at war, and we're going to primary all the Republicans, and we're so, but they didn't do, like, not enough people are doing that. and that's where the major dissonance for me came from, because like as soon as he started stepping really out of line, I started going hard at him, and everyone, and not everyone else, but too many people started being like, oh, I don't know, like give it time, or like, oh yeah, that's bad, but like, at least he's cutting some regulations. Like, I don't care if he's cutting some regulations while we're deporting people to Guantanamo Bay, and we're still, funding all these wars and genocides. So, forgive me, I'm a little bit more outraged about that stuff than like the cutting of a few supposed, regulations that might lead to some economic growth, which is probably being offset by the stupid tariffs he passed anyway.
So for the record, I don't necessarily think the Kingmaker strategy is a bad one in concept, but more than being able to call people out, you have to be relevant. You got to carry 10 or 15% of the vote and really be able to swing elections. That being said,
well, I don't know. I mean, I think even just our 1 to 3% of the vote was enough to like say what you want about what Angela did inviting Trump and all that, but like,
no, I love.
He didn't have to come. I think he came because
that moved us towards some relevance, without question. I love that move. But 1 to 3% of the vote doesn't make a difference in one election, maybe. But we're up against a machine that has, I mean, what did they spend? $2.5 billion on the last presidential election, and we have what, $40,000 in our bank account?
No, for sure. And that's the other thing about, like, even before all the Trump stuff, I was like, I stepped down as the Mises Caucus organizer way before that stuff even happened, and it was mostly over like saying, guys, this isn't working. Like, we're losing members, we're losing money, and maybe some of that was expected after Reno. But I was like, at some point, it just kept on being like, oh, we're going to turn it around. We're going to turn it around. Like, guys, we're not turning it around. Like, we're just not. Like, we gotta, like, here's the thing. I believed in what the Mises Caucus was selling. But I could also go, you know what? Not enough people are willing to buy what we're selling right now. So, like, like just I used to be self-employed, and just like the businessman in me is like, if people don't buy what you're selling, it doesn't matter how passionate you are about it. It doesn't mean like, oh, I invested so much time into this. And, if people, if people just, saw things my way, they buy my product. It's like, no one's buying the product. So you got to do so. It's like, either find a new customer base, but I mean, like, what's your new customer base going to be? Are they going to be libertarians? Or you need to figure out a way to like save the good stuff you really want to save, but like you might have to compromise on some other stuff to like, get membership up, to get, donations and money back up. Because I agree, the Kingmaker strategy long term doesn't work if you're bleeding members, bleeding money, and you can't get more than 1% of the vote.
But so it's more than that. So this is the part that I sort of wrestle with, and especially the communications and marketing aspect. So you said you hoped for Trump to go the best case scenario. You listed worst case. I would argue that he has been 1,000 times worse than even our worst nightmares. I happily voted for Chase, but it was easy, and here's why. Chase talked about the Ellis Island solution. I think he has an elegant plan for immigration. Chase talked about Social Security is going to bankrupt us, but we can't pull the rug out from under the people that rely on it, and here's a really good off-ramp. Trump ran videos of they're going to cut off boys' penises and turn them into girls, and Chase was like, we should probably let parents and doctors deal with complicated medical and psychological issues, and what if we remove liability so those doctors weren't going out and we're not worried about people on the right feeling that things are being pressured? Or Trump's immigration plan, they're eating the pets. Like, I'm seeing this crazy rhetoric designed to get people excited and fired up. For me, and I'm a little older than you, the last Republican I voted for was W the first time. And then Iraq, and then the Patriot Act, and everything that came with that. And I realized then that Republicans were they were worse than Democrats when they're in office, than Democrats are worse than Republicans when they're in office. It's the uniparty. They do the same thing. They're completely unreliable. So then you come up and you're believing the rhetoric. So how do we change that? How do we get people to stop believing the rhetoric each time?
That's an interesting question, because I think most of the time we would be predisposed to not believe the rhetoric. This was a unique time where it wasn't just like, subtle. This was like, hey, we're coming to your convention and talking to you and making promises, and, like uplifting even like Ron Paul and saying Ron Paul is going to be part of. So like, now like looking back with a sober mind, I can say a lot of that was kind of like eye candy, right, or ear candy, and maybe I
maybe it
think to
was
some
more than
extent
that, right? Maybe it was more than that. It was an actual plan designed to
maybe. I mean, I
usher
think
in an
that's
era where right-wing people are going to be okay with things like digital IDs and all of these other processes that are happening and shifting enough people over there. I think that is like I think we should be skeptical no matter what side it is. And I think there's this problem where when you have libertarians, especially the ones that are closer to Ron Paul or closer to Massey, that might be like, hey, I'm a little bit more close with the Republicans. I think they won't do these things. And then they become disillusioned with the fact that this is all still propaganda designed to get a certain outcome out of the population. And so, and then not only that was they were advised by Angela, right? Angela just did that like heart of the deal speech in New Hampshire. And she talks about clearly meeting with agents of the state to tell them how to propagandize and get not only votes from the libertarian community and the Bitcoin community, but also money from the Bitcoin community. At the same time, our party is dying and she's running up a credit card, right? So like these are things that like I look at it and go, man, like if there was a plan to destroy the Libertarian Party, like these are the steps that you would do. And you would use these propaganda points and you would use an insider that had been there to do it. Now, like, I don't know if this was for self-gain or what, but I think people were manipulated. And I believe that like people are now waking up to that. And I will commend you because you are willing to say, I did something wrong here by this vote, or at least my rationalization at the time you're saying was wrong. Right. And I think not a lot of people have the ability to do that. Usually libertarians are the ones that can though. Right. Usually we're ones that say like, oh, I had a bad thought process, because we've all done it. Right. As for people that weren't, that weren't raised libertarian, you all came from a different ideology. You were able to throw that away and move towards a new ideology. I think some people hold on still a little bit too much to the prior ideologies. But that process, I think, is something that, we should be embracing, being saying like, look, I made a mistake. This is what it is. But then figuring out how do we stop this sort of thing from happening? And how do we guarantee that the Libertarian Party does not act as a mechanism tool to help that process from happening? I'm sorry for interrupting, but.
No, those are fair questions. I think, for better or worse, it happened, and I hope it is a teaching moment for a lot of us. So far, it doesn't. It seems like there's more people who are just trying to do endless rationalization rather than, which I think what I've done is say, at the time I did what I thought was right, and I'm not going to, I guess, like betray my former self and to the extent of like, I don't know, I guess like to be like self-denigrating, but I'm just willing to say that like right now, looking back, I like things have played out way worse than I initially thought they could. And I'm not happy with I'm happy with Ross being freed. And I guess like there was like at least some marginal, not like moving the needle, right, but marginal good that came out of Doge in the very beginning in terms of just like exposing certain things like with USAID and whatnot. And like, so like early on, it was kind of like reassuring a little bit, like, okay, yeah, maybe things are going the right. But since then, not only did it like live down to what my bottom like low expectations were, but it's worse than that. And in terms of your question of like, well, shouldn't we have been able to see that coming? So I think a lot of this is going to come down to your theory of politics, which is part of I think not the primary driver, but part of the
my theory
kind of divide in the
popularity contest. That's all it is. This is high school class president all over again, just on a mass scale with $20 billion behind it.
Oh no, I don't mean that. I mean like in terms of like your libertarian political like strategy and theory, like in terms of like what is the way forward? Because I do think one of the divides beyond just the culture war divide is sort of on like what the purpose of the party should be. And, I'll just confess, I'm still not in the camp of like what I'd call the party purist position, where I've always been, I guess, allergic to that sort of like the Libertarian Party is a political party and it exists to solely run candidates to and that's like and kind of like reducing it down to just that. And like maybe it's a little bit of a pejorative term, but like, there's like an archetype that I often use for this called like the party justice warrior, where like I kind of don't like that for a few, like one reason I don't like it is that it actually just reminds me too much of the duopoly, where people just go like, instead of vote red no matter what and vote blue no matter what, it becomes vote yellow no matter what. And I understand the two-party system is rigged and flawed, but I don't always like focusing so much on like the duopoly, because it's like I don't know that like changing our system from a two-party system to a three-party system it is necessarily going to solve anything. So, and then it's like, what's the purpose of the Libertarian Party? What are our short-term goals? What are our long-term goals? Are we willing to do issue-based coalitions? Are we willing to do, coalitions like what just happened, which, to be clear, the whole Trump coalition was never part of, at least, like, I know some people are going to say, yes, it was, whatever. I'm not going to get into that. In terms of what people like me, who were ground level organizer, in terms of what we were talking about and what we believed, it was never like, the secret plan is that we're going to invite Trump to the convention and then basically tell everyone to vote for him. And like that was all ad hoc. But, we've always been open to issue coalitions and things like that. Like even before the Trump stuff, the whole like Rage Against the War Machine and all that was very controversial, which, to be fair, they should have never invited Scott Ritter. Mistakes were definitely made there. I hope, like, this is a bit of a tangent, but I think it's kind of related. I think what also doesn't help in all of this is that there are just so many people that do not have enough grace for other people. And to be fair, this happens both ways. Like, I'll give a shout out to a friend of mine, Jeremiah Harding. Jeremiah and I have some very strong disagreements, but him and I can have like a 2-hour podcast where we dive deep into those disagreements, but then like we're still friends and we still like recognize we have way more in common than we have in uncommon. And we both try to be gracious with one another, right? Like he doesn't assume the worst about me. I don't assume the worst about him. And there's not enough of that in the party, right? Like there's like right now, I'm not really offended by it, but like in the comments right now of this stream, there are people saying all sorts of stuff about me, right? Which are not very graceful. You guys are being graceful, which is great. No one owes me anything. They don't have to be graceful. It's perfectly fine. But like, we don't give people credit where it's due. Like Jeremiah, he actually used to like be welcome in Mises Caucus spaces. And then as soon as he started to get too critical, he got blocked and shunned. And I didn't like that. And that was a pattern that happened too often, where even though there were certain things where, and even today, where Jeremiah would be like, oh no, I disagree with the Mises Caucus on X, Y, and Z, but I think they're really good on, these 2 or 3 things, right? And like, I wish there was more of that. And not having to always be like, I don't like, and this relates to the whole party justice warrior thing, I don't like when people get excessively tribal and like demand this sort of like cult like loyalty. And the Mises Caucus has definitely been guilty of that in the past, but that's just that problem pervades beyond just the Mises Caucus. It exists in our party along different factions. Like I've never gotten any credit from the the hater side, so to speak, from my point of view, for any of the times I broke rank and went against the Mises Caucus on various things, such as when they invited Scott Ritter to Rage Against the War Machine, and I went like scorched earth to say this is absolutely unacceptable. And like, I had been, trying to get endorsements for the rally and stuff like that. And I was just like, I felt betrayed. I was like, I was like, if Scott Ritter's part of this, I'm not going to be part of it. And I helped, organize a bunch of people to put pressure on them to change that, so it's like, but we don't do that well. There's not a lot of like, I like what your vision's about, because I think that's kind of what we don't have. We're always going to have, for better or worse, I think, caucuses and factions. I don't know that you can get rid of that. Like if I could press a button and make it go away, I would, but I think it's always going to exist. But what we need is the willingness to like cross those factional lines and deal with each other in good faith, and like, like give each other credit for being like, hey, I know you agree with these people in X, Y, or Z, but you're willing to like not just go, you're not just going to follow suit with everything that this faction does, right? And vice versa. There's not enough of that, and that's what's very frustrating about a lot of this division within the party. I think is that there's not. Again, and I think I'm being consistent in calling it out on all fronts, including the one that I'm, been more associated with.
I do have to make a statement though. Like, I know that there's this idea that like the Libertarian Party is like, hey, we don't necessarily want to run candidates and we just want to spread messages. My argument is like, you can do that in the liberty movement already outside of the party. Like, we have these other tools that are available, whereas other people want to say, hey, how do we, and this is really where I think the main difference is that if you want somebody that's going to be like an absolute purity spiral scenario, do that through a think tank, do that through a nonprofit, do it through agorist movements where you're trying to create these things outside of the systems. I think that's where that part of it should be. But the people that are in the party should be rabid about the party of trying to even move. Like, so I'm somebody who, I think you can have pragmatic incremental changes that can be positive for everybody and move the needle for liberty. And so as long as it's pointed in the right direction, right? Like this last time around, we did some pragmatic ones, based on the Trump connection that I think pointed in the opposite direction. And so I think as long as we are still true to like the guiding light of saying like, look, this is the ideal, and then let's move it this way. But I really do think that the party needs to be something distinct, separate, and the purpose of it is to say there is another political option. It exists. And then we can tap you in. Once you get into here and you go, well, actually the politics stuff, maybe I'm more of an anarchist. Well, now you're tapped into a think tank. Now you're tapped into a nonprofit. Now you're trying to create liberty in real life outside through another mechanism, right? It's using the wrong tool to solve the problem, in my opinion, when you have people that are like, actually, I need that tool. Like, I want to use that tool and I can't fix things or even attempt to do it. And I think, if anything, they should be synergistic, that the more you run candidates that are speaking true, even if it's pragmatic incrementalism, the more you do that, you're going to push people into those other liberty movement spaces. And that would be a very positive movement overall. And I'm sorry for cutting off Rob. I know Rob was about to say something, but...
So I want to ask a question about what you just said, Jacob, because you were talking about. So I should first state, like, in terms of my libertarianism, I'm like, kids, if you're watching right now, like, do more drugs and be promiscuous. Just be careful as long as everyone's consensual, and then grow up. Just work hard, like, go for a run every day and drink a lot of water. You'll be all right. But I'm also like pro-life. I don't really think boys can become girls, but I will defend your right to try with a machine gun. Like, I'm all the way libertarian, I like to think. But you mentioned earlier you're one step away from fundamentalist Christian. So I came up Catholic. I definitely believe in God. Jesus is probably my Lord and Savior. I would feel hypocritical going all the way down that path. But I reflect on some of the biblical and religious aspects of things a lot. And I actually wrote an article last year called Christmas is an Act of Rebellion. And I don't know, have you read the Brothers Karamazov by any chance?
Years ago. And before I was a libertarian.
The chapter, the Grand Inquisitor, when Jesus comes back, and the Grand Inquisitor scolding him for allowing people free will and saying, "How dare you?"
Yeah.
So you mentioned, like, for example, what you call the homosexual lifestyle, right? In Leviticus, I think men lying with another man is mentioned twice, and "Thou shalt not eat." Was it cloven hoof is mentioned 17 times as a penalty punishable by death. Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself is the greatest of one of the two greatest commandments. He says, judge not lest thou be judged. Let he who hath no sin cast the first stone. And then you mentioned the factionalism. And I don't know, how do you reconcile being opposed to the factionalism, which I support? And I know I'm putting you on the spot, but I'm really trying to phrase this like respectfully, because this has been a good conversation. I appreciate you being on here. Certainly not judging, really curious. But how do you reconcile being opposed to the factionalism if you're leading with that portion of what you consider to be your Christian identity?
I don't know that I lead with it, at least now. I think, if I'm being honest, there are times where in the heat of the culture war within the LP that I've become, that I even became definitely more leading with that, and also just like there were times where so like as much as I'll call people out for not having grace, uh, there were times where I ran out of grace for other people, and I can make the excuse and say that like, well, I felt wronged at the time, and so I just kind of ran out of patience and started getting shitty with people. But um, I don't think it's a good excuse. I hold myself to a higher standard than that. Um, but there was a time where I did lead with that more, and I was more edgelordy, willing to troll people, and then I kind of repented of that. I was going through some stuff with my family at the same time, and had like I never walked away from the faith, but I definitely between like 2021 and 2022 had a uh, not a full prodigal son experience, but just kind of more of like hey, I've kind of fallen off the path a little bit of what I say and believe, and I need to recenter myself, recommit myself. And that was kind of the genesis of what led me to leave the Mises Caucus, maybe like a year later after that, I think. Not leave the Mises Caucus entirely, but just step down as an organizer. But so I'll admit to falling short of that standard at times. But like right now, I think for the most part, I try not to, with my message, focus too much on talking about things like gay marriage and the LGBT issues and whatnot. And even when I do, what I try to do is to just say, listen, like as a Christian, wearing my Christian hat, here's what I believe, and I'll defend what I think the faith, teaches and what the Bible teaches. But my primary lane is that of a like a Christian political theorist, I guess. And I also simultaneously make the biblical case for not restricting people's rights, including their legal right to engage in homosexual lifestyles and relationships. I mean, as long as they're, by the same legal standard, we judge all relationships as long as they're consensual. And I actually spent a lot of time railing against Christian nationalists because I think they misunderstand the Bible and have warped it. I think the separation of church and state is a biblical principle, and I think that they've distorted that, and they want to, go back to a sort of theocracy, and that needs to be combated. And so that's actually more of what I lead with, and I actually have a lot of guests on my show, including Hody Johns is a good friend of mine, and he's actually a Christian who believes the opposite of me, that the Bible says that homosexuality is okay, and not sinful. So like I don't, that's not like my leading issue. I definitely, like anyone, I have my biases, fall short sometimes. But I try to be open-minded. I try to be fair. I try to stick to the libertarian side of it, and also platform people that disagree with me on that issue, because it's like I'm not like if I was like a theologian, right? Like in my full-time occupation with a theologian, I think there's a space for that and for apologists, but that's not like I dabble in that stuff because I'm intellectually curious, and as a Christian who does his own theological study and whatnot, I like to talk about it. But I do think at this point in time that's not my my leading thing. My leading thing actually right now is going around and telling a bunch of right-wing Christians that Jesus didn't teach them to stop sin with the state. The whole core of Christianity is the only thing that can save you from your sin is to be born again, is to be given a new heart, is to have the Holy Spirit regenerate you, and to take out the heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. And the whole biblical narrative is, the Old Testament is like a experiment in what if God gave a people a specific set of laws to say, follow and obey these laws to obtain righteousness. And they completely fail over and over and over again. Then they get a king. Like, oh, what if we get a king? That'll make it work, right? And then it fails over and over and over again. So yeah, I mean, like that is my what I lead with. So like, maybe it's too, I do lead with my Christianity a lot, but I think I try to lead with it in ways that really synergize with the libertarian message. And if you're not a Christian and you're not into that stuff, then you don't have to listen to me, I guess. So, but when I'm acting with my LP hat on, I'm trying to, I'm the only thing that I'll say is just to be like, let's try to not engage in the culture war stuff, as much as is possible. Or, like I've even, I think you can even lean into it in positive ways to be like, hey, half of the country thinks abortion is murder. Half the country thinks it's a fundamental necessity for women to have autonomy. However you feel about those issues, the state doesn't seem to be the right way to approach that problem. At least not this giant monopolistic state that has a one-size-fits-all solution for 330 million people. Like that experiment seems to be failing. Right. So you can lean into that to promote federalism and decentralization and stuff like that, I think. But other than that, I think you should, try to just stick to the principles. And as far as the factionalism, yeah, I think it's tough. Like we're all going to fall short, but I think that's why you have to just, I don't know, like my biggest gripe with the Mises Caucus is that it became an echo chamber, and that echo chamber fosters factionalism. It cuts you off also personally. You're not able to grow. You're not, because you don't engage with people who disagree with you. And it's also kind of boring. Like, I love all my Mises Caucus friends still, but like when we get together and talk, it's like, it's like, hey, we kind of just all kind of share. I mean, not, more disagreements now lately, but before that, it was like, hey, we all kind of agree on everything. Like, I enjoy talking to people in good faith who are willing to have the conversations to be like, hey, here's where we agree, here's where we disagree, and isn't it so cool? Like that should be a libertarian virtue. Like the whole, like what I said before about like the priest and the sex worker. Like we should showcase to people that like, hey, our values are, religious pluralism and social cooperation and cosmopolitanism, and like the idea that like we can have a free society where like, like you don't have to like if you don't agree with someone's way of life, well, like you don't have to do that, but then you can still like trade with each other and be neighbors and be good to one another and respect each other's individual rights. And that's just a better way to live life than to be constantly fighting over the ring of power to try to dominate each other, to, coerce them to be more like you, which doesn't work. It just creates cycles of cultural blowback, and the state continues to grow in power, and we're all, like we're all fighting each other while the chains around our, limbs and whatnot get tighter. It's crazy.
So let me maybe I found some interesting part there that Rob was bringing up the idea that there are all these other Old Testament sins, and it does seem very much like a right-leaning thing to focus in on this one thing associated with sexuality. And I think it comes largely from this question of like your religiously defined morality around sex, right? That there's this thing there, and then that gets imposed further on. But when it comes to the sex worker, it might be okay, like, oh, well, they should be able to get along even though this question's there. But it's not constantly being brought up as like a, hey, this is anti-libertarian or this is a culture war thing to bring it up.
Well, hold on. Can I've never said that just people being gay is a culture war. Like, I have friends who are gay in the libertarian space. There was a trans member of the Mises Caucus for a while, and it wasn't like every time we got together, I was like, oh, you being trans is a culture war thing. Like, the only thing there was just that I even think you should, from the Libertarian Party platform, be able to talk about gay marriage and things like that. I just think there's ways to do it that don't lean into what I kind of think is sort of the phony, fake rainbow pride, like corporate bonanza that the left engages in.
Who decides like where that is, right? Or is it possible that you're just, kind of painting that onto a libertarian perspective around it? Like, and we look at LP Louisiana, where like, again, they are talking to a group of people that are currently feeling oppressed by the state. Right. And so like if your goal is to reach out and say like, look, no matter who you are, no matter what you do, no matter what your religion is, no matter what your sexuality is, you can be a libertarian. And this is part of it, is that cosmopolitan version of libertarianism. And so I think that's my worry, is that like it becomes a extra focus specifically from the religious standpoint, whereas like, you know, Rob brought up, like I don't see the same sort of fervor going against other things, like, you know, having different fabrics that are touching or whatever that was in the Old Testament that we do see here. Now I can understand the idea of fake, you know, not real sincerity, but like I would never accuse LP Louisiana of having fake sincerity about calling out and promoting or
Well, no,
promoting the
I
idea
think
that
they
they're supposed to be
believe.
free.
I think they believe what they believe. I don't like that style of messaging because I think it just mimics the insincere messaging of the left, and it leans into like I don't like the whole like group, like, you know,
But I
portraying
mean,
things in terms of like group rights and whatnot, and that seems to lean into the whole identity, because like our thing should be that we are against identity politics across the board. And if we dilute that message by, even with good intentions, mimicking a style of message that the identitarians on left and right are using against one another, I think we're confusing what we're about, which should be the third way, which should be the opting out. And I'll just say, like, and like, you know, it might be an area we just agree to disagree on, but I've even talked to a lot of gay and trans people who like kind of agree with me that like they kind of don't like the gay pride you know, flag and all that being pushed nonstop, and that like it is like that doesn't really represent me. I don't want to be pandered to. I don't want to like I don't know, like same thing on matters of race and whatnot. Like I never liked the Black Lives Matter stuff because like I want to lean more into a society where we're colorblind, and I want to lean more into a society where like we're not identifying by our you know, we're like, you know, making your I don't know, sexual preferences like a major identity thing. Now I understand the history there, that like they didn't have equal rights for a long time and they were fighting to get them. And I can appreciate the nuance there. Like I wouldn't say even, and you know, I think if you look at my social media profile, this is not like my number one issue and priority, right? And I think you asked who decides it. Well, who decides it is like we decided as a party. We have to have these conversations, and you know, I think, you know, like I'm not calling for LP Louisiana to be censored or anything. I'm much less offended by that than, you know, anti-Semitic nonsense coming out of LPCO or LPNH. So I mean, you know, I don't know. Like I mean, that might be just something where we disagree, and as long as I'm not like, which I'll admit in the past, I probably leaned into this stuff more than I should have. But I think right now I make it something where I make I go, listen, I don't know that that's the right way to message on a state party platform as a party in general on those particular issues. But those are conversations I think that we just have to have as a party. And, you know, to some extent, maybe it's good LP Louisiana exists, and that like I actually think it's good to have like the state parties can all kind of have their own thing in a way. And for a long time, that's even how I defended LPNH and their more edgelordy take, but I just think it's gotten way out of hand. So that you know, but I was willing to defend it in the past because I went like, yeah, I don't know, like we can have a state party that really pushes the envelope, right? But I you know, I don't know if you guys know this, but like I've been calling them out for going too far before this latest thing. Like I actually, and not just me, I once did a very long, painful X space, and it was like me, Dave, and Michael Heiss, and we were talking to Reed Coverdale, Jeremy Kaufman, it might have been one other person, or it might have just been those two, about the whole like LPNH stuff. Because like me, Dave, and Mike were just kind of like going, you know what, we've defended you guys in the past, and we want you to kind of push the envelope, but now you're just like, you know, the warning signs were there, right? Like they were going way more into the, you know, like what, like black people shouldn't complain about, what was the one they said about like black people in slavery that was really like off the wall? I forget exactly what they said.
Yeah, it's they've. I mean, the list of the horrible things they've said is miles long.
Right.
And
So like
it
we've
paints
been
this horribly. You know?
my point is being that like it wasn't like just suddenly recently I went, oh no, LPNH went off the wall. Like it's been for a while that me and others have been vocal about saying like you're going off the reservation in terms of like what we can defend, and then they went really into the crazy with the recent anti-Semitic stuff. So I don't know. I guess my point there just being that I'm okay with like everyone's gonna have their preferences. We should be able to talk about them. We should probably try to also like think about what hills we're gonna die on and which ones we aren't. I think the hill, the woke stuff is my preference. It's not the hill I'm gonna die on. In terms of the rainbow flag and whatnot. Compared to other things like anti-Semitic memery, like, yeah, it's a hill I'll die on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it leads to the what is the purpose, right? If the purpose is to stop authoritarianism marching, right? It's like you have to be like, okay, where is the hill going to stop us? When is these actions going to make it harder for us to keep moving this needle forward? And I think there's a clear difference between the two. And I'm happy that you recognize that, even if you have these personal biases. And I will say, you say this anti-woke stuff, but like the fact that you acknowledge that you have this bias, right? And that you are now saying, hey, I have to challenge this or bring in things that challenge these biases that I have. Like that's something that like is a part of, the idea of woke culture, is that that you have these biases and you don't want to project them out there unabashed. You want to say, hey, where am I maybe being judgmental or bigoted, and go, hey, maybe I should think about these, or and discuss these things.
I think so. This was actually one of my problems with the woke stuff. Like again, like I came from the left. Part of that was because I became anti-war at a young age, and I grew up in the Bush years. So I mean, it was just like, back then all the anti-war action was on the left, unless you were a Ron Paul guy, and I just missed the Ron Paul train. But I didn't always have those cultural biases. I used to be more of a progressive Christian. I didn't have the current convictions I have now. And, in terms of my problem with like why I call it woke and why I have a problem with it, is because I think what it does is it moves us off from talking about the actual issues of like what's the proper role of government, and are there rights violations, should the state be involved in marriage at all, and it then brings it back into everyone having everyone digging their heels into this sort of like identity warfare, I guess, which is part of the whole culture war thing. And then where that becomes a problem, it becomes a problem in many cases, right? But one of the problems is then that people have a tendency to overreact. You talk about that pendulum swinging, and they'll throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I'm even guilty of this, right? Like I think I said earlier, I think I overreacted when I left the left, because they became so like super zealous, like overly zealous, like cult like, almost like fascistic, like obsessive with the anti-racist, anti-bigot stuff, that like they just everyone was a bigot and a racist and a transphobe and all this, that I overcorrected to the part where I was like, it's not really a problem in society. And I think now I've kind of course corrected to say like, you know what, like, no, there are things that are true that just got misconstrued, or like they got wrapped up in a bunch of like identity politics and sanity on the left. That doesn't mean they're untrue. One of them being like, I do think that there are things like inherent biases and cultural biases, and we all have prejudices that we know of, and probably prejudices that we don't know of, and that can be towards it can be for a litany of different things, right? And for a litany of different reasons. And I think it's good to know where those are, to recognize them, and that part of being a healthy individual is like, even if you're convinced something is right, you should try to like there is a very small list of things in this life that I hold with a closed hand. I hold my relationship with Jesus in a closed hand. I hold my, my relationship with my wife, my love for my wife, my love for my kids in a closed hand. I then hold my libertarian convictions in a pretty closed hand. Maybe not to the same degree as those other two things, but it's still a closed hand. Then you talk about something like my interpretation of what the Bible teaches on gay marriage, which like I don't want to get into here. Like I've talked about it before. It doesn't seem relevant to talk about that now. You brought up like the Leviticus passages. Like my argument is not just solely based out of the book of Leviticus, but just whatever my interpretation is there, I don't hold that with a closed hand. That's more of a, this is what I believe, but I also recognize that this isn't as important as those other things. And I want to, like, if I'm right, I should be willing to have conversations with people who disagree with me, because all that'll do is help me to learn and then strengthen my position and be able to defend it better. And if I'm wrong, because I know I've been wrong before, because I wasn't always a libertarian and an anarchist, then having those conversations is part of what's going to, introduce me to ideas that are going to change my mind eventually. So it's a win-win in either case. And that's part of, like, and I've said this several times now, that's one of the most damning things I have to say about the Mises Caucus, which I think led to some of the other errors that I've been, critical of lately, is that they shut down the conversation. And that was the fundamental difference in I still agree with them on so many things. I still agree with them, which we have some disagreements we've talked about here on what should we use the party for. I align more with them on a lot of the cultural issues, and style of messaging and whatnot. But the one core disagreement which we had, which became an irreconcilable difference, at least in terms of me being intimately involved, was the stifling a conversation, because I think it breaks the spirit of free speech. Because it's not just the ability to criticize the government. In order to be able to think, you have to engage in conversation and talk things out. I think that's like one of the most, like, you can't have a free society if you don't have free speech, if you don't have conversation, because the only alternative for conflict resolution to talking is violence, right? So if you don't have the conversation, it's not an accident that more than ever people don't talk to each other, or if they talk to each other, all they do is like shout talking points at each other, not actually converse. And we have the biggest rise in not only political violence, but just like general hostility for one another in this country and society. So yeah, I don't have a good way to land that other than to just stop talking, but hopefully that makes sense.
No, it definitely makes sense. And I know you said you had a kind of a hard out at an hour and a half. I think this is a good conversation. I think we should have more of these. I would like it if you would get involved in LP Alliance and start talking to some of these other people there. And I like that you are open to these conversations. And I disagree with your opinion about the Christian faith and what it says about gay marriage and things like that. And I would hope more conversations would bring that to you. And I may not be religious anymore, but if I was, I would say, I hope that God gives you, the experiences in your life that would allow you to recognize that position. And otherwise, I agree that the Libertarian Party, it needs to get over this idea of not talking about these things, because the same destruction that happened internally to the Mises Caucus will happen otherwise. You have to be willing to engage with people you may disagree with heavily, right? And even if it's something serious, like Chris is bringing up, that I called out Chris for giving the $20, and I get in there. Am I going to never interact with you again? Would I never debate that idea with you? No. And I even said the reason why I went after you so much was because you have a Twitter name that is invoking Rand, who is an anti-collectivist, and now you're giving money to someone who is very clearly a collectivist. So I hope you understand why. It does not mean that I will never have a discussion with you, and I think that's the biggest problem.
Is this about, what, do you give money to Toad, or?
No, to Shiloh.
Oh, to Shiloh.
Yeah.
Well, can I just say, because like this I know we're a little over time, and this might be a setup for like a future conversation, but I think that's one of the differences in this culture war stuff too, is how we even approach things like collectivism and bigotry. Because while I agree we should be kind of brutal with politicians and the leaders, to the people, like to just general people, I don't know that the right way to combat bigotry and collectivism is to like approach it like they need to be punished or have like this punitive, like if someone's a bigot, like the best thing we can do is to shame them, to like hope they lose their jobs and are just shunned from civil society. I'm like, that doesn't seem to make people less tribal and hateful. It kind of makes them double down, in my observation, which is I think also one of the different, like early on in some of the I had a lot of like fights with the Libertarians crowd, some of them who were watching this, and that's something I still strongly believe. I think there's many libertarians who have the wrong approach when it comes to combating bigotry, which I agree is a bigger problem than I initially thought it was. But that might be something we need to talk about in the future, is like, how do we combat them? Because I don't know that we entirely agree on the right way to do that, which it would be better if we did agree, because it is something that is, we can agree it's important to push back on. But well, how we do so matters.
Can I quote you from earlier? Maybe not the exact words, but in a society where you don't have coercion, the only thing you have is going to be that speech and discussion about it. And I think separation of association and calling things out in public shame is the only thing you can do if you're unwilling to use violence, right? And so otherwise and
why does it have to be shame? Like, can't you just call it out and be like, this is what I did with Toad. I said, like, Toad, listen, I don't agree with a lot of the things you've said lately. I've been arguing with Toad for the last few weeks because he's one of those people who I'm talking about, who has fallen into identity politics, who has basically said, like, screw it, the left started this and they played identity politics, and like, so whatever, like, we're going to play white identity politics and deport a bunch of people. And, he called me a bunch of names and whatnot for not wanting to go along with it. And I was just like, no, man, you've lost the plot. That's horrible. Like, you're advocating for violence. There's no justification for that. And, I think these are bigoted ideas, but he's not going to change his mind if I celebrate him losing his livelihood. And I'm like, yeah, I hope you end up homeless and alone. I think what you do is go, listen, I disagree with your speech. I disagree with what you said. I think you've gone down the wrong path, but just like the love that I think you should have for immigrants and for people of all races, I also have for you. And I don't agree with you when you advocate for harm towards other people. And I don't wish harm upon you by that same very standard, even though I strongly disagree with the things that you've said and done.
Well, let's define harm here, right? Like, in the libertarian sense, there's nothing that's aggressed against him in this process, right? There are actions and reactions, right? And so I think that's what kind of separates us, is that if somebody looks at it and say, hey, if a company does not want to associate because
if we're talking in a strict legal sense, no harm has been done to him. And on just a human fundamental level, he's suffering from reputational harm. He's suffering from financial loss and hardship. And again, it's like, if we want a society where people become less collectivist and less tribal, pushback against the ideas is vital. But, like, I'm going to steal something from my friend Hody, who I think says it best. Like, we need to be giving people a safe place to land on when they reject their bigotry. But when you kind of tell people, like, you're a piece of shit because you said this bigoted thing and I hate you, and like, I want you to lose your job and to, be shunned from civilized society, what you're telling them is, you are now a bigot. You are now a hateful person. You've committed this sin and there's no redemption. And I don't want you to ever have a safe landing place to come back to. Like that. I think that's the message it communicates, which I don't see how that actually de-escalates the culture war, how that de-escalates the identity politics and the rapid descent into tribal chaos that we're heading down. So
have you ever listened to Daryl Davis?
I swear to God, I was just about to say that.
I think Daryl Davis has the exact approach that I'm advocating for.
But he called them bigots to their face too, though, right? Like there was a process where they did shame them for their thing, but then would continue to talk to them. And I think that's the distinction, is that if you're going to be somebody that says, I'm going to wade into this water and try to pull people back from this, right? You have to still call out the action as it is very strongly if you're going to do it in that route.
I agree. I guess the devil's in the details on a lot of that. But like I said, this might be, I do have to go.
It's another conversation. Yeah,
it's a good big conversation to have, I think.
Jacob, it was really nice. You and I just met for the first time. So thank you. It was a great conversation. Happy to continue it at any point. For everyone watching, if you look up On a Positive Note, Bridging the Gap with Music as an event I put on a few years ago with Daryl Davis. I don't believe in heroes, but the closest thing I have. LP Louisiana, you are my second favorite state, not affiliate, just general state overall. So if you ever need a speaker, I'm 100% in. I just wanted to throw that out there. Everyone else listening, thank you. Have a Spidoinkle day.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah,
and hopefully we can do this again.